Welcome to the wonderful world of wine, exploring all things wine with you. We are your hosts, Kim Simone and Mark Lenzi, and you can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the wonderful world of wine, trending topics in the wine world with Kim and Mark. How are you this week, Mark?
Everything's great, Kim. Always
Good.
looking forward to talking to our listeners about what's going on in wine world.
That's right. So we are going to talk about a few things that have kind of been in the wine news and kind of front of mind for a lot of people in the wine industry this week. And then for future shows, where we will get back to doing some of our interviews. But right now we are going back to kind of how it all started, where we're talking about topics in the wine world, articles in the wine world, and just trying to bring all of this information and things that we find sort of fascinating about what is going on to you, our listeners. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about was there is this technology that was actually developed by a doctor in Boston that has been a very popular way of serving / preserving wine for the last, say, decade, maybe 15 years. It's called a Coravin. Mark, I know we've talked about the Coravin device a little bit on the show, but will you refresh our listeners' memories as to what a Coravin device is?
Yeah, we did cover the original Coravin
Yeah, we
in
did.
past show. Like you said, Kim, the gentleman who invented it was in the medical device field. And so this device, if everybody's picturing a bottle of wine that has a cork and it's sealed, you've not touched the cork yet, you would take the Coravin device, which has this long needle on it, the original version, and you would take the needle and kind of inject it in through the cork, and you would have gas in this Coravin, and it sucks out the wine. It pours the wine, a nice little 1 ounce pour, and then at the same time, it injects gas into the wine to preserve it. So when you pull the needle out, the cork reseals, and your bottle stays fresh. You can put it down for years and years, and next time you want it, you just insert the needle again and take out another sample. And I had one. You had the original, right, Kim?
All the time at the wine school.
And at first, like all gadgets we get, Kim, we're into it. I was kind of using it as a, how can I say this kindly, as a kind of control substance to control how much I'm drinking of wine. I didn't have to take the cork
I
out, so I
see.
wasn't tempted to drink half a bottle or a full bottle. I
I
could
actually
take
think
it.
that's a really smart use for it. I mean, you use up a
Yeah,
lot of gas that way, but yeah, if
that was
you
that
need,
was the intent.
okay,
That was the intent, and
good for you.
unfortunately, that one's collecting a lot of dust, I think. But it is a good gadget to sample wines that you wouldn't want to. Maybe you want to see how they're evolving. You could take a little here, take a little there. So, I mean, it was valuable. Then they just came out with another model, which we both have, called the Pivot, which now that needle is just more of a probe. So you have to totally remove the cork. You put one of their special stoppers in, and then the probe goes through the stopper, and it's a little less expensive. The original
Mhm.
version's like $350, or you can get it a little cheaper. The Pivot, which is no needle, it's just a probe, is like $150. What do you think of that one, Kip?
That's actually the one that I keep at home. And I do the extra level of when I open. So I open the bottle and I'll give it a little squirt of the can of inert gas that I keep in my kitchen for my open bottles of wine. And then I'll put the Coravin stopper in. I don't know if it's doing anything different. It just makes me feel a little bit better to have that extra level of protection on my
Yeah.
bottle of wine.
Coravin is inserting gas too in the Pivot model, so it's
Right.
still
Yes.
still
Yes, it
preserving
is.
it.
Yeah. So I think it's argon and nitrogen that it inserts. It's neutral, but I don't necessarily find that it really lasts for as long as the advertising says that it's going to last. It's great for a few months, but I wouldn't do it for a few years
With the Pivot or with the
with any
original?
of them.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
See, I haven't
But
tried
I think it
more
depends
than
on how
maybe
much you
six
take out of it
months.
too.
Yeah. That
So, yeah.
That's interesting. With the second version, the pivot, I had the idea, my wife is always asking me, she'll have a bottle in the fridge she might forget about, and she'll say, "Is this any good?" I'm like, "Well, just taste it. You drink it, you know." I said, "Well, I'll get her the pivot so she can always keep it fresh." And then now that one's next to my other one,
Oh
never being
no.
used. So now we have to talk, and they just came out with a sparkling wine Coravin, and have to pick your brain on this because to me it didn't make any sense. So I want the listeners now to picture your sparkling wine bottle. You take the cork out of it, and usually you have a champagne stopper, which we've talked about many times. It clips onto the lip of the champagne bottle to keep that pressure in there.
I
So
own a dozen of
Coravin
them.
now has their own stopper. It's super jumbo that goes on top, and then they have the Coravin that pumps gas into it after when you seal it, and then when you want to serve it again, you just pop off their stopper, pour the champagne, and then put their stopper back on like you would any normal stopper, and then inject gas again. And they said it lasts, I want to say they say it lasts 4 weeks. Do you see any benefit of that Coravin, Kim, versus just using a stopper?
I want to know what gas they're injecting. Are they
It's
injecting
this.
carbon dioxide that is redissolving in the champagne?
I think it's just their normal inert gas. It's just their normal. It's nitrogen, right? Those, or is it argon in those little
It's argon or
caps?
nitrogen.
Yeah,
It's one of
I
those.
think
But
it's the same tank. It's the
the
same.
issue with doing that with sparkling wine is that now you have created all of this room in the bottle for the carbon dioxide bubbles in your champagne or your prosecco or your whatever bubbly type of wine you're drinking. That carbon dioxide gas will now escape into what we call the headspace of that bottle. So it's not going to stay dissolved in the wine. All that top 30% or whatever of your wine bottle that is now open. So even if you are protecting the wine from oxygen, you're still losing your sparkle. So I don't really know how that works.
So you're saying once you take off their industrial stopper, it's going to get a huge
Not even
pop
once you take it
again.
off. Say you pour half a bottle of champagne out of your bottle of champagne, and then you put the Coravin stopper back on and you insert inert gas into that. So that inert gas is going to create a layer of protection over the wine that will keep it from being exposed to oxygen. But the carbon dioxide in your wine, you're not adding pressure to that bottle. You're only adding different type of gas. So those
Right.
carbon dioxide bubbles are going to continue to leave the solution and to leave the wine. And they're just going to go into the rest of the bottle. They're not going to redissolve in the wine. So
So that's why they're only giving it 4 weeks.
that would only give
How
it a couple
long?
of days.
How long was a stopper usually keep your champagne for?
Couple days.
So yeah, well, they're saying 4 weeks with this,
Yeah,
right? We'll have to
it's like
test it.
think if you have an open bottle of soda on your counter. I mean,
Yeah.
that open bottle of Pepsi is not going to stay bubbly.
And it's $400. So I mean, I
Whew.
haven't seen any reviews on it, but
Mm,
what you're saying makes sense. We'll have to research it more.
yeah.
But the real reason we want to refresh everybody and update
I was
these
gonna say,
things,
let's get.
right, is because there was a trending story out there. And when I heard it, I'm like, oh my God, I never thought of this.
Yeah, this is
But
so
there's a
so
lot of
fascinating.
wine theft being done now with people using the Corvin. So Kim, explain to our listeners how this is happening.
So it is possible if you use the Coravin device to withdraw a small sample of wine from the bottle. So think really just a couple of ounces is what we're talking about. But using the device on the bottle can be hid fairly well. And especially because if you're using it on a bottle of wine that has a natural cork, cork is very pliable. It's made up of teeny tiny little cells because it's from bark of a tree. So those cells, they kind of like mush back together after you've injected put the needle through the cork, and that's how it creates another very good seal. It sort of heals itself. So what has been allegedly happening is that people are using the Coravin on a bottle of wine. They are taking a little bit of a sample, and then it pretty much goes unnoticed by the consumer or by a reseller or somebody like that. And the article and the case that we are particularly talking about today has to do with some very small production, hard to find, expensive wines from a very small region in France called the Jura region, which doesn't produce a whole lot of wine, but their wines are extremely unique. And there are a number of collectors out there in the world that really, really want to get their hands on these wines because they are very limited. Not a lot of it is made, and they're funky, they're cool, it's kind of a hot thing. But this was a really interesting interesting case where two people who purchased Jura wines from one particular retailer both brought allegations of somebody at the store using a Coravin device to siphon off some of their very expensive wines, and I'm not sure where the truth lies.
Yes, so they showed an actual picture. Now, if you do have some wine in front of you or ever have one in front of you, look at the top of the capsule. A lot of times there are two original holes in the capsule, little pinholes that we talked about in the past that are really just there so they can seal that sleeve over the cork. And these people noticed they bought these wines for investment. They noticed there was another pinhole in that capsule, which they assume is a Coravin needle taking out some of their volume that they bought. And when I heard this, I'm like, wow, that's pretty ingenious. First of all, to think, because if you had, say, two cases of this and you siphon little here and little there, you might maybe get a bottle or a half bottle
Yeah.
out of
Or
it.
just
Or
a taste,
yeah,
you know?
sampling themselves. They didn't come back and say we had to test it. We didn't want to send you a corked bottle, right? They could
Yeah.
have said that because they obviously saw the pinhole in there
Who's
and they knew
they?
the volume was lower, the people who bought it,
The
right?
people who bought it. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of discussion now in the wine world of, be careful because people could be siphoning out things that you're buying. And what made me think about it, Kim, is when salesman comes in and they have the Coravins now, and I look at the bottle and I'm looking, geez, it doesn't look like there's really much gone yet, right?
Yeah.
So they could basically draw down a little bit and you'd never know.
Mm-hmm.
So
One of the things also that occurred to me for this one was like, if you're going to do this, at least try to cover your tracks because a lot of these bottles had wax cappings, which you will see for some either expensive bottles or some more traditional producing areas. And there are a lot of wines from this region of France that will, instead of putting a capsule on top of their wine, will do like dip the neck in wax. And so you have this like wax coating. And they had the pinholes were going through the wax. And then I was like, just get a hairdryer or something, like remelt the wax, man.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
cover up
Think
that
of
hole.
something. Yeah, think of
Which
something.
which made me think like, all right, either they're not being smart about it or this actually wasn't Coravin. I don't know. I had lots of thoughts about
Well, I'm
this
sure there'd
too.
be more coming out about it. It'd be one of the things now to add to your thing if you want to invest in wine or you're thinking about
Be careful with the
purchasing.
Coravin.
Yeah. And even now, I'm thinking when you go to a restaurant, when before they take that foil off, look at the
Oh
top.
man,
If they have a buy the glass program or something.
I would never have thought of that.
Yeah, see?
Oh,
The restaurants just
okay.
be careful. Looking at the foil, I'm trying to think of the when they bring it over, they present you the bottle. Usually you
Hmm.
don't look at it until they take the cork out and then you kind of look at it. But have you ever looked at the sleeve before they've cut the foil to present it?
Oh, this could be
No,
a
right?
whole new change to the restaurant server ritual of buying a bottle of wine at a restaurant. Times are changing.
You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine, and we are your hosts, Kim and Mark. If you'd like more information about Kim, you can go to her website, commonwealthwineschool.com. For more information about myself, you can go to franklinliquors.com. To find our past episodes, you can go to SoundCloud or iTunes. Our program is supported by Franklin Public Radio, and you can find all of our past articles and shows on our Facebook page, The Wonderful World of Wine. Okay, so now we have another topic. We just talked about the Coravin and the theft that's going on out there. And Kim mentioned the wax toppings that can be used on wine for the caps or the capsules. And there was a quick article we want to talk about is should wine reviewers comment on packaging? And they mentioned about this wax issue, Kim.
Hmm.
And the gentleman said he did a review on a wine, and I think he gave his displeasure that it was wax coated. It took him some time to cut it off. And then the winery came back to the reviewer and said, why did you have to mention
They were
the
really mad.
wax? Right? So
They were really mad.
what do you think, Kim? Should people who are reviewing a wine tell you about the wax or the packaging or what the size of the bottle? Should they
Yeah.
be talking about that?
I think so. It's all part and parcel to the same thing. I mean, there's nothing that says that a wine reviewer, you must stick to just the sensory parts of what the wine is all about. The package is so much a part of the experience of a bottle of wine. It's not just what it tastes like in the glass. There's tradition, there's history that goes behind it. And frankly, those bottles with the wax on the top are a real headache to open sometimes. So I think that when a winery makes a decision to do a certain thing when it comes to packaging, that it means that reviewers can also comment on that packaging because the winery is doing it for a certain reason. And whether that reason is it's tradition, it looks cool, it makes my wine look expensive, I'm trying to get a point across about where this is from or any of those things, then I think that yes, that is fair game for a reviewer to talk about because the winery has kind of opened the door by making those decisions. So I say yes.
Yeah, I agree. And not only about that wax issue, but say like the bottle was a huge heavy glass bottle.
Yeah,
He
sure.
might want to let the people know, hey, they're not really sustainable, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you get people who care about that. The design, maybe say, hey, I couldn't read something. I just had this come up where I bought a $10 bottle of a Spanish Cabernet that I bought it based on the vintage. And when I got the wine, I couldn't find the vintage on the label.
Huh.
So I sent a message to the supplier and they said, geez, I don't see it either, but I
Huh.
know it's 2021 vintage. I know that's what we got. I said, well, I don't see it on the label. He went back to the winery and they said, see our name? It was a black label with like embossing on it. They said, see our name? Look under the name. And I got a magnifying glass
Oh,
and I
oh my
saw the
word.
vintage was kind of imprinted in there, but it was because it was a dark colored label. So
Oh my goodness.
I as doing my review could said, hey, I love this wine. It definitely is a 2021. Take it from me because you can't see it on the label. But so I can see how people could say that. So
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
feel where this gentleman was coming from, saying he did nothing wrong and the winery shouldn't have really complained about it. So we just thought we'd talk about it, Kim.
Yeah, I think all of those things are important when it comes to especially in enjoying a bottle of wine. And in your case, if you feel like they're not giving you the information that you are looking for, then that is a detrimental thing. It made you work harder.
Yeah, made me question if I got the right thing
Yeah,
after trying a certain vintage. When you buy on vintage, which we feel is important, it was important.
it's important.
So the next thing, Kim, we have to spend some time and update our listeners on is the big talk going on about should there be a nutrition or ingredient labeling on U.S. wines, Kim? And there's all sorts of articles. Kim was mentioning before the show. I sent her like a bazillion articles on it. So we know it's trending out there, and there's a lot of talk. So what do you think, Kim? Nutrition, ingredient? What was your take on the articles?
Yeah, there's a lot of opinion out there. And I think the best one that I read was talking about, this because we label all of our food products with nutritional information, ingredient information, it makes sense that we also would label our beverages with the same information. But because wine production is more complicated than picking a head of lettuce and putting it in the grocery store or a lot of other food products, that there needs to be some rules and some guidance that are thought about and put into place ahead of time so that it's not just the ingredients that go into the wine, but it's also accounts for some of the things that are used during production, but then are no longer in the wine. So I think that there is a lot of thought that still needs to go into determining what actually gets put on a wine label. And I'm not saying that consumers or customers should be false information, but I think that a lot of the things that can be used in wine production can be very scary when they are phrased in our terminology that wine professionals use, but that might not be understandable for the general public. So an example in case is that there was one survey done that people were reacting either positively or negatively to some things that are used in wine. And one of the things that got the highest negative rating was tartaric acid, because I think whenever you see the word acid in a production kind of a way, it gets people a little bit nervous. But if you were to see that phrased a little bit differently on a label, you would be less scared of it. So, do you know? Of course, you know, Mark, what else we buy regularly that's tartaric acid, but that people don't know it, and that's cream of tartar. So because we know that cream of tartar is something that we just, we use when making meringues or doing whatever in the kitchen, it's on the spice shelf. It's not scary because it's something that we think we understand because it's right there on the shelf and we can buy it, and it's not this like dangerous feeling thing. But when you see its other name, which is tartaric acid, you don't know what that is. And so it seems scary. So I think that that is where education comes in and where there need to be some things in place so that the public knows and understands what they're actually reading and looking at on an ingredient label.
Yeah. Wow, you covered there's so much to say.
my
I have
my
so many
speech.
thoughts. No, I mean you covered so much. The real reason, I just want to give the listeners a little background. The real reason a lot of it's now coming up is because starting December 8th of 2023, so last year, the EU passed a law now, a labeling law. On their label, they do need to include nutrition declaration and an ingredients list and allergens, along with alcohol, origin, contents, everything else we talk about on the US label. So there was all this talk, okay, EU's doing this. What are we doing here in the
Mm-hmm.
United States? So it brought up all these issues Kim was saying. And a bunch of articles were generated from this. An interesting one was from a legal side where they said, okay, so we're going to list ingredients. We have to define, what we're going to
Mm-hmm.
do. And there's going to be a difference between how the bigger people do it and how the little guys are going to do it. And maybe the little guy doesn't know what he's using for ingredients. Like Kim was mentioning, they use a lot of things to correct things, acids, scary things if you hear them, but they might not remember because they only have so much production. He might have did something or put something in it, and then someone finds out it's in there, and then someone could use that as like a legal thing to turn around and sue someone because they didn't properly ID something. So there's a lot of this talk about how we're going to protect people if they miss something. If
Mm-hmm.
you're asking for all these specific things, does it
Yeah.
have to be 100% accurate? Whereas the bigger producers might have a regular formula, no matter what, they know exactly what they're putting in it. And that's how it tastes the same all the time. So that was brought up to start. So first, the EU has this. America's got to do something about it. What are we going to do? And what's the difference? Should we just give nutrition versus ingredients?
Can I interject for a
Yes, of
sec?
course.
So I think it's helpful if people think about it like a recipe in a restaurant. Like if you're going out for a meal and you go to McDonald's, it's going to be the exact same thing in that Big Mac every single time you get it. But if you go to a restaurant that is just one restaurant and the chef is really creative and maybe doesn't use the same amount of paprika in the dish every single time she makes it, or there are more onions in it this time and there's less cream in it this time. It's like that. So every
Yeah.
vintage of wine will be different because the base ingredients are a little bit different. So,
Yeah,
the
good
grapes
example.
may be a little bit less ripe, or you might have a little bit more of Merlot versus a little bit less of Cabernet. It's like if you are making tomato sauce in your restaurant kitchen and you're using fresh tomatoes, one time you might have gotten riper tomatoes versus less ripe tomatoes. So you need to balance that out with a little bit of sugar, or maybe you need to add some vinegar or whatever to make it taste the way that you feel it tastes the best. And that is what we're talking about here. It's not necessarily about using quote unquote dangerous, scary ingredients. It's how consistent can a winemaker be from year to year if they are a real artisanal wine producer. So that's a lot of the issue with the labeling issue. And I'm not saying that I'm against labeling. I'm actually not against labeling, but I'm pro education. So I am good for education in concert with the labeling, because I feel like if consumers see something on a label that they don't understand, they're automatically going to view it as a negative, and it might not necessarily be that way.
Yeah, good. That was a good example with the food, and
Mhm.
by now the listeners probably say, "What the heck are Kim and Mark talking about here?" There's so much. I mean, this is something that's new. It's something that could be scary. There's sides from the big producers and the small producers. There's sides from the lawyers. But the big thing is, do we want nutrition or do we want ingredients? ingredients, and they did a lot of consumer interviews. What do people want? What do you feel is important? What do you think are ingredients? And a lot of
Hmm.
people were not even really close understanding what the nutrition values were.
Yeah.
And that got people a little nervous because they're saying, well, if we tell them the nutrition, they have to understand the real things behind it, right? You have to understand what calories, and what are carbs, and what's sugar. And then if you see that, you might be turned off on the wine now because you're actually seeing that real information, right, Kim?
Hmm.
The Germans did this study about that the nutrition, once people see it, will confuse them. Don't use it. Mandated nutrition labeling will increase the cost. So when you think about it, if you sent out a sample of the wine, of every wine you made, because you had to get the nutrition information, it's expensive. All right. There's huge costs. I think it was I want to say it was like $400 they charge a lab
Hmm.
for to
And I
detect
remember
it.
seeing this, before a couple of years ago when we started to have this chatter about putting ingredients and putting nutrition labels, and that, it is going to detrimentally affect the little guys more because it's because of the cost associated with doing this lab work and stuff for the
Yeah.
wines.
So if it's 400 a sample and you have, say, 40 wines you have to submit, that's $16,000, right? So the big wineries already have lab. We talked about this many
Hmm.
times where they have chemical engineers in their thing. So they won't get affected as much as the little guy for that because they already kind of have the labs. But there was an interesting thing I learned, Kim, that with the FDA, did you see this thing about calories? The FDA actually has a percentage thing.
No,
I
I
don't
think
know
I
if you
missed this
saw
part.
this. So the FDA has a 20% leeway when it comes to calculating calories. So in wine,
Oh.
typically you say 12% alcohol, you're talking maybe 120, 125
Hmm.
calories. It could be 150 with that 20% thing.
That's a pretty big
And
that's a pretty big
that's
difference.
what they're saying. If the FDA has such this big, why even you're
But
saying
that's
you
for everything then, isn't it?
yes, it's an
So your
FDA
bag of
ingredient.
Doritos could be a whole lot more calories than you thought.
Exactly. And I never knew that
I didn't
before.
either.
So that
Huh.
really got me thinking. And then there was another a blog about the TTB. Because of all this happening, the TTB reached out to people and said, "Hey, we'd like to know your thoughts
Hmm.
on what we should require." So a lot of people wrote in saying what they support, and we have to define ingredients. Do you want
Yeah.
ingredients in the final product, ingredients used throughout the product, or not? And I
This was
need,
this was the article that I was referring to at the very
yes.
beginning about it needs to be done intelligently. And I
What do
really
you
liked
feel though,
his take on
Kim,
all of this.
on that? Do you care what's used before the final product, or do you only want to know what's in the final product?
I only want to know what's in the final product,
What's
personally.
left? Doesn't
What's
matter
left.
what they use to make it.
Which is also where I think the whole sugar in wine thing comes down too, because obviously you're making wine from the juice of fruit, which starts off with lots and lots of sugar. So there needs to be some differentiation between how much sugar is left in the wine on the label. And I think that there is some confusion in that as well for the labeling.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I'm sorry. I'm just surprised how you're
What?
thinking that just at the end.
Oh, because
So
it's
if
like
I'm
for
making the
production
wine and I'm
stuff.
using like this products out there, they could be cancerous or something, but once it ferments, it's non-detectable in the final product. You don't care that at some point it touched the wine.
Is it in there anymore?
No, non-detectable at the end, but it was used in the beginning.
But if it's not in there, then I'm not
Oh,
drinking it.
all right. All right.
So, all right, so you're on the opposite side. You want to know
No,
everything that's used in the production.
I'm thinking only from education, from quality standpoint. If they're doing something in the beginning with some weird stuff to make the final thing taste like the final thing, why?
But the
Whereas a
stuff that
regular
they're
winemaker doesn't
using,
have to,
but the ingredients or the
they're
whatever
saying it's
this
safe.
chemical is that they're using in the wine has to also be approved by the government for
It
use in the wine.
Yeah, it's approved because it's improved as an additive that's safe, but doesn't have to be listed.
So if it's safe, why are
Currently, it
you
doesn't have
saying
to.
it causes cancer?
It's because it's a carcinogen before it's fermented.
I see what you mean.
So yeah, so
Okay, so it's a
I'm almost kind of
carcinogen.
like
So
I'm
scientists have determined that once this thing goes through fermentation, it's no longer
it's no
carcinogenic.
longer right.
Okay. And it
It's
has
no
undergone fermentation, correct?
right.
So it's no longer carcinogenic.
So they say, yeah.
Oh, see, that's it, is that you don't believe it.
Wow.
I totally see what you mean.
I'm not a
Yeah.
conspiracy guy. I'm
No, I know
just
you're not.
thinking, well, there's just so many things in the production. They're saying that there's ingredients that they're not there at the end, right? The
Right.
yeasts, the enzymes,
Yeah.
phosphates, concentrates. You mentioned acids.
Well,
There's
the
a million.
concentrates would still be there.
So
Like if you're using
like mega
concentrated grape
purple's
juice, yeah,
used,
then that should
but
be listed because it's not like the mega purple goes away. The mega purple is still in there. It's more like the fining agent. So if you use clay to fine the wine and then you remove all of the clay from the wine, then you
right. So
don't
you
need
don't
to
have to
list it
list it.
because
So
it's no longer in there.
So then if I use egg or milk to find the product, you're saying it's filtered out. I don't have to say, I could say it's safe for vegans, but it touched it, but it's
But are
not in there
you,
at the
so
end.
say you're allergic to egg whites and you drink a wine that has been fined with egg whites. Will you have an allergic reaction to that? I'm asking purely from I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know. I just know you can't consider it vegan because it touched it, right? I mean, even if it's not
Yeah, but
detectable, it touched
I
it.
know, but vegans, I mean, vegans don't even eat honey because the bees were harmed in
Bees,
the
yeah.
production of the honey. So,
Well, this is perfect because it's showing the whole confusion
right. But
about
I think
if
that
we
the
do
flip side of
ingredients.
that too is that if you show every single thing that is used in the production of wine, people who don't understand, which is the vast majority of wine drinkers, and even I don't understand every single thing that goes into a bottle of wine. If you see a labeling list that has 36 ingredients on it, you're going to say, oh my God, this is the most chemically altered product I have ever seen. There's no way I'm going to drink that again.
Right. And that's what they're saying. They're saying
Yeah.
if you saw the list, you could easily detect what they call an industrial wine versus a handmade wine or
Yeah.
small production versus
Think
a big
I'm trying to think if there's a like my comparison between the Big Mac and the tomato sauce in the little mom and pop restaurant. I'm trying to think if there's a another kind of comparison to this about a product that we regularly consume that
Well, there's got to be more
has
preservatives in the Big Mac sauce than there is someone's handmade kitchen sauce because they probably
no,
made
that's
it
not what I
fresh.
mean. That's not what I mean. I mean like something that you can buy for food in the grocery store that has a lot of things in it that were used in production, but that don't have to be listed on the
Oh, I see
ingredient
what you're
label
saying.
because
Yeah.
they're no longer there. So like
Maybe
you
like cold
use
cuts. There's
what
probably
no, but those have to like
preservatives that
yeah, but those are listed on the label. Those have
they
to be
are.
listed on the label. But so say you're not, so pesticides, those were
Right.
used for the growing of your carrots. Those don't have to be listed on the label, but it still was used in the production of those
Right.
carrots.
Right.
You
Right.
don't have to list those things. So
Right.
yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, they even went to the extreme saying, should we say if you add water,
Yeah.
that's an ingredient,
Yeah. And that's what I was
right?
thinking too. It's like, yeah.
Oak substitutes. If you
Mm-hmm.
add more alcohol, do you
You
need
have
to
to
put
say if it
in?
was aged in an oak barrel because that's considered to be an ingredient as well. Yeah,
So
I don't know.
there's so much to this. So I think the overall consensus was saying, okay, no matter what we come up with, obviously you don't want to put this all, you won't be able to fit it with all the other health, everything else that needs to be on the label. So the consensus is there's going to be a QR code that will have something, nutrition, ingredients, all or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. If you want to scan it and find it out, go ahead. And I think more people were okay with that versus having to list everything. And then you
Yeah.
have the opposite side where like who's the gentleman, the Zinfandel producer that he's really natural
Oh,
and
Ridge
rich.
that puts everything that has
This
always
they
put
he
everything on the
always
label.
puts it on the
Yeah.
label. And he's saying, nope, it's yeast. It's what's he say? Water, yeast, grapes, that's it.
Yeah.
And he's that's what he wants everyone to do. And he knows no one else will do that. So the QR code seems to be the solution, but no one knows what to put on it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen some low alcohol, no alcohol wines with nutrition on it now, like food. And it's not required, but they're putting it on there. Have you seen much of that, Kim?
I think some of those are required. actually.
for the low
Yeah.
alcohol.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when you once you get below a certain point, it's considered a food product and it's not considered necessarily an alcoholic beverage.
Oh, because it might have juice or something like that, like similar to juice.
I forget what the reasoning is, but there's a reason why there are some because there it's not just like an ingredient label like Ridge
Yeah,
has
yeah.
on the back of their label. It's an actual like from the government nutritional calories, carbohydrates, fiber, fat
Yeah.
kind of thing. So I think it is there because it has to be, if I'm not mistaken. I don't
Well, I
really know
mean,
why.
for me personally, I think I'd like to know something.
Hmm.
If it's if it's a QR code, fine. Because I'm a geek. I
Yeah,
search a
because
lot of
you'll
stuff
use
on the
it.
label.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And I
mean, I'll
think some
use it.
people will.
And if people really want to know, it's just like if you want to know what's in your food, you read the ingredients, right? Or you
Right.
might research more and go find out, whatever you see on that ingredient, you might research, find out what it is because you can't even pronounce it, right? So I think there should be some regulation of it. There's already many, like you said earlier, Kim, many approved things that the government says you can use this. We're telling you they're approved. You can use it. And people, if they want to find out, they can find out what those are and research or call the people and ask them if they use them. But I think we need a little bit more transparency on what's going in to them.
Well, I think it'll be fascinating if that does go through and depend. Well, I mean, because eventually this will happen because it just seems like this is going to happen one way or the or another. Whether it's the full list of everything that was used in the production of the wine or not. But I think what will be interesting is how folks like ourselves respond to it or harm or even how marketing agencies respond to it. Like, what is going to be the response as far as making sure that wine drinkers still continue to drink wine, even given all of this information? Is it going to be we put a positive spin on it? Is it going to be we up the education? Is it going to be that people start brand new blogs to describe and talk about what all of these ingredients are and why they're used and why they should be used or shouldn't be used? Like, it's going to be fascinating to
Yeah.
see comes about because of this, I
It's
think.
going to give us more to talk about,
It certainly
more
is.
to educate about, more class ideas to do,
Yep, yep.
more things to talk to the listeners about that's might be trending as a new ingredient or things they might switch ingredients now
Yeah,
or but yeah,
very
it's all
fascinating.
happening soon. I mean, it just
Right.
happened in Europe, so it'll take a while here. I was trying
Yeah.
to think of something in the wine world that took place in Europe as a standard that took a while to get here, and I really could you think of anything, Kim, that they did in Europe that eventually we did here? I couldn't really think of anything in the wine world
Not
that
in Europe,
like
but screw
this.
caps out of New Zealand.
Yeah, yeah, I guess that
So,
trend.
and
Yeah.
that took like quite a number of years before screw caps became accepted for all manners and styles and stuff like that. So, yeah, that's really the only thing that I
Yeah.
can think of.
I guess like shipping like with different packaging like the bladders I
Yeah.
think was done in Europe
But I
before
also
it
don't think
finally
that
came.
that's something that a lot of wine consumers know anything about. That's something that we know about in the
Yeah.
industry, but I don't think it's something that
Yeah, so
people
there's
really generally
nothing going to
have.
be compared to this.
No, as far as being right there in public eye.
It'll be a
So we'll
whole
see.
new class on labeling.
That's right.
We have to work this EU thing into on the EU labeling classes now that just took place.
That's right.
Allergens, we didn't really talk about it much, but that's something they are putting on the EU label now. And I'm sure that has its own list of things that if it says it has these allergens,
Hmm.
so people know. I mean,
Yeah.
if people are allergic to certain things, I'm sure a lot of it has to do with some sort of preservatives, right? I mean, what are people allergic to besides supposedly sulfur, sulfites?
I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, you could be allergic to really anything. This is where I feel like the egg thing, I would like to see more research. If egg whites are used in wine and then they're removed,
Is
if
it
you have a
detectable?
serious, yeah, if you have a
Yeah.
serious egg allergy, then of course you would want to know that that is there. But it's like for distilling, right? So if you're gluten free
Right.
and you have
Right.
celiac disease, you can still drink spirits that are made with the base product being a gluten containing grain because distillation removes all the gluten. So,
Yeah.
like, I have a colleague who's gluten free, but he teaches our spirits classes and has absolutely no problem with any of the grain based spirits. So it's like that.
I can't tell you how many times I had that with discussion with people saying, "Oh no, I can't,"
Yeah,
my
I
gluten
can't drink
allergy.
whiskey because I have
I'm
a
like,
gluten
there's
allergy.
nothing left living
Yeah.
in this after it's distilled.
And that's my point that I was trying to get to at the beginning about if something is no longer present, why do you need to be concerned about it? So maybe that's
Right,
the
right,
comparison there is with spirits, and there's none of that left in the final distillation. But yes, it was made from grain. So do you need to have an allergy warning on whiskey because it
right.
was made with grain? Because people are regularly allergic to gluten in grains,
Yeah,
even if
you could
it's
get
not gonna
really
cause a
you could
reaction.
get really
But
technical because saying the grain, but it's not even there, right? I mean,
you make him a point for me, man.
yeah, yeah. Oh, there's just so much
Yeah,
we could go
yeah.
on, and our listeners don't want to hear us raving all about this and going off.
Oh, they like when
So,
we argue.
well, that we do. So we covered a
We
lot
covered a
here.
lot.
There's a lot coming. We'll keep you posted when there's an official thing, I think, Kim. Until then, I don't think we will cover much more unless there's some breaking
Yeah.
stories that trend in the meantime. But
But even
eventually,
Even the European labels don't have to put it until it's wines from the 2024 vintage are on the market. So it'll be at least a year,
yeah, you'll
unless
see end of the
we'll see
year.
it on Beaujolais Nouveau, I guess,
Yeah, end of the
this
year
year.
this year you should
This year.
see it,
Yep.
and we'll put it out there for an article for people to read.
All right. We'll buy some Beaujolais and we will read the ingredient labels on the back and have a grand old time. Thank you for listening to us today on The Wonderful World of Wine. We have been your hosts, Mark Lenzi and Kim Simone. You can find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine and our past episodes on SoundCloud and iTunes. And as always, we are supported by Franklin Public Radio. Cheers.
Why, why?